Barry Gibb. Three brothers, bound by blood, music, and an unspoken bond. Their rise to stardom was as dazzling as it was tumultuous. But behind the glittering success, there was a deeper story, one of rivalry, regret, and a love that transcended it all. Now, for the first time, Barry Gibb reveals the untold truth about his brothers, their music, and the legacy they left behind. A journey of triumph, loss, and the harmonies that never truly fade. Barry Gibb is now 79 years old, living a quiet life in his home in Miami. The house is peaceful, surrounded by warm light and familiar comfort, but it also carries a certain stillness. Inside his studio, the place where so many songs were born, there are photos of his brothers on the walls and shelves. Robin smiling slightly, Maurice with that gentle look he always had. These photos are not decoration. They are presence. They are memory. They are pieces of a life that was once full of noise, laughter, arguments, creativity, and constant music. Barry still works sometimes, but not like before. Now, his days are slower. He wakes up, makes his coffee, and walks through the same rooms where the echo of old days still lives. The studio remains open, instruments ready, yet many days he just sits in silence. He touches the piano keys, sometimes playing a few notes that fade quickly. The silence after the notes can feel louder than the music. It reminds him that something is missing, or rather, someone. He has been part of a legendary group, one of the most successful in music history. But today, he feels the weight of being the last one left. Maurice passed away in 2003, Robin in 2012. Each loss changed him in ways that cannot be easily explained. When they were young, they were three voices blending together. Now, Barry is one voice, singing songs that were never meant to be sung alone. He has said that sometimes, when he performs, he can almost hear them beside him. But when the music stops, the room is quiet again. People still see Barry as a legend, a music icon with awards, fame, and history. But in his own eyes, he is simply a brother who misses his brothers. The world remembers the Bee Gees as a group, a sound, a moment in time. Barry remembers them as boys, sitting on the floor, trying to find the right harmony. He remembers the small things, the laughter, the arguments, the dreams they shared before the world even knew their names. Sometimes, the loudest sound in a musician's life is silence. But before the silence, there was a story one the world never fully understood. Barry Gibb's journey started far from the stage, in the small and quiet surroundings of the Isle of Man, where he was born in 1946. His family soon moved to Manchester, England, where music was always a part of their lives. His father, Hugh Gibb, was a bandleader, and his mother, Barbara, had a love for singing. Music was a constant in their home, and Barry grew up hearing songs being played in the background of daily. Even as a young child, it was clear that music would be an important part of his world. His parents, both passionate about music, encouraged him to learn instruments, sing, and experiment with sounds. But it wasn't just the music that would shape Barry. As the eldest son, he took on the role of protector. He was the responsible one, looking out for his younger brothers, Robin and Maurice. Although they were very close, their personalities were starting to show early on. Barry was serious and focused, always thinking ahead. Maurice, with his cheeky smile, had a quiet strength that made him the peacemaker, while Robin was the dreamer. Robin had a natural talent for melodies and a voice that could move anyone who heard it. His personality was different, more mysterious and poetic. These traits began to show from an early age, but they would soon play a huge role in shaping the group's sound. In 1958, the family made the big decision to move to Australia, which turned out to be a turning point for the brothers. The change was significant. They found themselves in a completely new environment. Australia, with its wide-open spaces and relaxed lifestyle, seemed like a fresh start. It was there that Barry and his brothers began to experiment more seriously with music. They played in local bands, developed harmonies, and began to write their own songs. The three brothers spent hours together, creating sounds that only they understood. The bond between them grew stronger as they realized that they weren't just playing for fun, they were playing with purpose. Barry was becoming the leader. He was protective of his brothers but also fiercely determined to make something of their music. He had a sense of destiny, as though he knew that something big was coming. Robin and Maurice, while younger, had the same vision. The music was no longer just a hobby, it was the beginning of something much bigger. There was a deep understanding between them, unspoken but always present. The dream of becoming a successful band was no longer a fantasy. It was something that they believed in with their whole hearts. Their early experiences in Australia marked the birth of the Bee Gees, though they didn't know it yet. The trio spent hours writing, harmonizing, and rehearsing. Their voices blended together perfectly, and Barry knew that together they could create something special. But even then, things were not always easy. As children, they faced the usual struggles of growing up, but they also had the challenges of being an immigrant family, adapting to a new culture, and finding their place in a new country. Yet, through all the struggles, they had each other. The bond between Barry, Robin, and Maurice was growing stronger every day. It was a bond based on love, respect, and, most of all, shared dreams. They were three boys, far from the fame they would one day achieve, but the seeds of something legendary were being planted. They didn't know it then, but the music they were creating would soon become part of the world's soundtrack. But childhood dreams rarely survive untouched by the world. In the early 1960s, the Gibb brothers began to form something much bigger than they could have ever imagined. With their natural talents and a dream to make it in the music world, they officially came together as a band, the Bee Gees. After spending several years in Australia, they returned to England, ready to take on the world. England was where it all began. Barry, Robin, and Maurice had grown into seasoned performers, and now they had the chance to show the world their music. It didn't take long before their sound began to catch attention. Their harmonies were unique, so pure, so sharp, that it was clear they were a special group. Their first few hits set the stage for what was to come. Massachusetts, with its infectious melody, became a massive success, and it wasn't long before To Love Somebody followed, showcasing their lyrical depth and emotional resonance. But it was New York mining disaster 1941 that truly marked them as an innovative band. The song's somber tone and haunting harmonies caught the attention of critics, and soon the Bee Gees were a household name. Robin's voice, in particular, became a standout. Critics and fans alike were struck by the haunting quality of his voice, a sound that seemed to carry deep emotion with every note. Robin had a way of conveying emotion in his singing that few could match. It was as though his voice was not just heard, but felt. While Barry was the one who led the band and crafted much of their sound, it was Robin's voice that brought depth and soul to the music. His ability to sing with such vulnerability set him apart from the rest of the music world. And, at the same time, Maurice, with his ability to play several instruments and keep the band grounded, was the essential balance to their dynamic. The relationship between the brothers was one of deep respect. Barry, as the older brother, naturally took on the role of leader. He was focused, determined, and had a clear vision for the group. Robin, on the other hand, was more emotional, pouring his heart into every song, every performance. Maurice was the glue that held them together, playing his instruments with skill and ensuring the harmony in their sound remained intact. The trio, despite their differences, blended their personalities seamlessly in their music. Each brother knew his role and embraced it. Together, they created something special, a bond that was both creative and personal. But as their success grew, so did the tensions. Creative differences started to arise. The brothers were now living a life they had only dreamed about. But with fame came pressure. Barry, with his growing role as the band's primary songwriter, began to clash with Robin over the direction of their music. While Barry wanted to push their sound in new directions, Robin, deeply connected to the emotional core of their songs, wanted to preserve the heart of their music. The arguments between them became more frequent, and sometimes it seemed that the music itself couldn't heal the growing divide between them. Their first few years of success were filled with excitement, but there was also an undercurrent of unease. The rise of the Bee Gees was not just about creating music anymore, it was about managing the personal dynamics of a group of brothers who were also creative equals. Each of them brought something unique to the table, but as their fame grew, so did their differences. The strain started to show, and it was becoming clear that success, rather than making their bond stronger, was beginning to pull them apart. Despite these tensions, their music continued to captivate audiences. But deep down, Barry, Robin, and Maurice all knew that the harmony they had once felt as brothers was starting to shift. There was love between them, but now there were also frustrations, misunderstandings, and a sense that they were no longer the same group of boys who had once dreamed of musical greatness together. And when success arrived, it didn't elevate them equally, it began to pull them apart. As the Bee Gees' fame skyrocketed, so did the tension between the brothers. What started as simple creative differences soon turned into a full-blown rivalry that threatened to break apart not just their music, but their bond as brothers. The first signs of trouble appeared during their recording sessions. Barry, who had always been the driving force behind their music, wanted to push the band in new directions. He felt that they needed to evolve and keep up with the changing musical landscape, especially as the 1,970 seconds arrived with its shifts in styles and sounds. He had a clear vision of where the Bee Gees should go next, but Robin, who had a deep emotional connection to their music, was not so willing to follow his lead. Robin had always been the emotional heart of the Bee Gees. His voice was the one that could move audiences to tears, and he was deeply protective of the band's identity. He didn't want to lose the soulful, melodic sound that had made them famous. As Barry pushed for more experimental sounds, Robin resisted. Their disagreements became more frequent, and what had once been a partnership based on love and mutual respect began to feel more like a battle for control. These disagreements were no longer confined to the studio, they started spilling over into their personal lives. At one point, Robin decided that enough was enough. He briefly left the group in 1969, feeling that his artistic voice was being overshadowed by Barry's strong leadership. It was a difficult decision for him, and for a time, the Bee Gees were reduced to just Barry and Maurice. But even without Robin, there was an unmistakable emptiness in the band. Barry, who had always been the visionary, realized that something vital was missing: Robin's emotional depth. Maurice, ever the peacemaker, tried to keep the balance, but the tension was palpable. Barry's music was evolving, but the harmony the Bee Gees were known for had been fractured. During Robin's brief absence, media speculation ran wild. The press, ever eager for drama, painted a picture of a band in crisis, focusing on supposed ego clashes between Barry and Robin. Headlines screamed about disagreements, sibling rivalry, and the potential breakup of the Bee Gees. The brothers, already struggling with their own emotions, found themselves under intense public scrutiny. The world was watching, and the pressure only intensified. The media storm made everything worse. It added fuel to the fire and created a distance between Barry and Robin that had never existed before. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about who was in charge, who had the final say, and who was willing to sacrifice for the band. The creative tension between them turned personal, and as the band's fame grew, so did their emotional distance. Even Maurice, who had always been the glue keeping them together, found himself caught in the middle. Maurice loved both his brothers and didn't want to choose sides. He was torn between the two, trying to keep peace. But no matter how hard he tried, the rift between Barry and Robin only deepened. For Barry, the tension was especially hard to bear. He had always been the one to protect his brothers, but now he was feeling more and more isolated. He had a vision for the Bee Gees, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to bring that vision to life with Robin's resistance. For Robin, the emotional strain was even worse. His voice, the one thing that had always connected him to his brothers, now felt like it was being suffocated by the changes Barry wanted to make. Robin wanted to preserve the soul of the Bee Gees, but he was finding it harder and harder to have a voice in the direction the band was going. The rivalry between Barry and Robin reached its peak during the recording of their 1,970 seconds albums. The tension in the studio was so thick that it was almost impossible to ignore. They fought over lyrics, over arrangements, over the smallest details. It was clear that something had shifted between them. The music, once the bond that brought them together, was now a battlefield. The brothers were no longer working in harmony. They were working in opposition, and it was taking a toll on their relationship. The emotional distance between them was undeniable. There were times when they didn't even speak to each other, and the once tight connection they had shared seemed like a distant memory. Maurice, ever the peacemaker, tried to bridge the gap, but the tension was so deep that even he couldn't fix it. The Bee Gees were on the verge of falling apart, and the dream that they had shared since childhood was starting to crumble. But fate had a way of pulling them back together, just not gently. In the early 1,970 seconds, as the music world began to shift, the Bee Gees found themselves at a crossroads. Their early success had given them global recognition, but by the end of the decade, they were facing a new challenge. They had to reinvent themselves. Their classic sound was no longer fitting the musical climate. It was the dawn of disco, and the world was changing. So, the Bee Gees made a bold move. They left behind their traditional pop-rock roots and relocated to Miami. This change of scenery was more than just a geographical one. It marked the beginning of a new era for them. In Miami, the Bee Gees immersed themselves in a new musical environment, influenced by the vibrant, rhythmic sounds of the city. Miami was a place of freedom, energy, and experimentation, and it became the perfect backdrop for the Bee Gees' transformation. Barry, in particular, found a new sound that would define their music. his falsetto. Until then, he had never used his falsetto voice to its fullest potential. But in the warmth and creativity of Miami, something clicked. Barry discovered a higher, smoother voice that added a layer of emotion and flair to the Bee Gees' sound. It was a revelation, and it changed everything. His falsetto became the signature sound of the band, and it would soon become one of the most recognizable voices in the world. As the Bee Gees embraced their new sound, they also found themselves at the center of a cultural revolution. In 1977, they were asked to contribute to the soundtrack of a new film called Saturday Night Fever. The film, starring John Travolta, would go on to become a cultural phenomenon. But the soundtrack was what turned the Bee Gees into global superstars. Staying Alive, Night Fever, and How Deep Is Your Love became instant hits, and they dominated the charts. The Bee Gees were no longer just a popular group. They had become the face of the disco era. Their music was everywhere, in nightclubs, on the radio, in movies, and in people's hearts. They were no longer just a band. They were a movement. However, the rise of disco was not without its challenges. As the Bee Gees became the poster boys for the genre, they were met with both adoration and ridicule. Disco, once a niche genre, exploded into mainstream culture, and with it came both praise and backlash. For every fan who embraced the new disco sound, there were critics who dismissed it as shallow or commercial. Many saw the Bee Gees as the leaders of the movement, and they were often at the center of the storm. In the beginning, the brothers were criticized for abandoning their earlier sound, and their new style was seen by some as a sellout move. But despite the early ridicule, the Bee Gees continued to push forward. Their music spoke for itself, and soon, even the critics were forced to acknowledge their brilliance. What began as a wave of mockery turned into a wave of respect, and the Bee Gees' place in music history was secured. During this period, Barry and Robin were also learning to work together again. After their earlier conflicts and the brief split, they had found a new rhythm. Barry, with his leadership and new vision, and Robin, with his emotional depth and voice, were able to create magic once more. They began to understand each other in new ways. The success of Saturday Night Fever was not just a musical triumph, it was a personal one. Barry and Robin had managed to overcome their differences, and their relationship as brothers and musicians had been rebuilt. They were no longer in competition. They had learned to complement each other's strengths, and this made them stronger as a unit. The disco era changed everything for the Bee Gees. They had gone from being pop musicians to becoming icons of a cultural revolution. But, as with all great success stories, there were challenges beneath the surface. While the world saw the glitz, glamour, and hits, the brothers still had to contend with the pressures of fame, creative differences, and the weight of expectations. Despite the triumphs, the pressure to stay on top was always looming, and as the disco craze began to lose steam in the early 1982s, the Bee Gees had to face new challenges. But the years of success had given them a solid foundation. Their music would live on, but the world would never forget how they had reinvented not just themselves, but an entire era. But the higher the spotlight rises, the darker the shadows it casts. Barry Gibb's life was filled with success, fame, and musical triumph, but even as the Bee Gees reached the peak of their career, the foundations of his personal life were being built on the strength of love and family. Fame can bring untold riches and accolades, but it's family that grounds a person and keeps them humble. For Barry, family became the anchor in a world that constantly pulled him in new directions. Before he became the legend he is today, Barry was still a young man navigating the complexities of love and personal growth. His first marriage, to Maureen Bates in 1966, occurred during the early days of the Bee Gees' rise to fame. Barry was just starting to make a name for himself, and he and Maureen were caught up in the whirlwind of youth and ambition. However, the pressures of fame, combined with the demands of his career and the intense focus on music, took a toll on the relationship. After just 4 years of marriage, Barry and Maureen divorced in 1970. Looking back, Barry would later reflect that his first marriage was a lesson in emotional growth. He learned about the balance between career and personal life, realizing that the fast pace of success could easily overshadow the personal connections that truly matter. Although the marriage didn't last, it taught Barry about the emotional complexities of love and commitment, lessons that would stay with him throughout his life. In the same year that his first marriage ended, Barry's life took a turn for the better when he met Linda Gray, a former Miss Edinburgh. Unlike his first marriage, which had been marred by the pressures of an emerging career, his relationship with Linda was built on a deeper foundation of mutual respect, love, and stability. Their connection was immediate, and within a year, Barry and Linda were married. Over the next 5 decades, their relationship would grow stronger and more resilient, providing Barry with the kind of stability and grounding he needed amidst the chaos of fame. Linda became more than just Barry's wife. She was his rock, his constant support through the highs and lows of life. As the Bee Gees experienced global fame, Linda was the one who kept Barry grounded. While the world saw Barry as a star, Linda saw him as a husband and father, offering him a sense of normalcy and emotional support that allowed him to navigate the pressures of being in the public eye. Their partnership was a testament to lasting love in an industry known for fleeting relationships. Together, they raised 5 children: Stephen, Ashley, Travis, Michael, and Alexandra. Their family life was a picture of stability in an otherwise unpredictable world. Through it all, Barry remained devoted to Linda. She was by his side as he navigated the roller coaster of fame, the emotional highs of success, and the painful lows of loss. Even as the Bee Gees faced internal struggles and creative tensions, Barry's relationship with Linda was a constant source of strength. She was the one who kept him centered, reminding him of what truly mattered: love, family, and the importance of staying true to himself. Their relationship stood as an example of how love could survive even the most challenging circumstances. In a world of fleeting fame and temporary connections, Barry and Linda's partnership was a rare and enduring testament to the power of love. While Barry found grounding in his marriage and family, his brother Robin's the world was quite different. Robin, though deeply connected to his brothers, had a more tumultuous approach to relationships. His emotional struggles often took him on a different path. Robin's romantic relationships were filled with passion and intensity, but they were also marked by moments of instability and emotional turmoil. Unlike Barry, who found strength in his marriage to Linda, Robin's relationships were often shaped by his inner struggles. His emotional world was always a bit more chaotic, and his love life reflected that. While Barry and Linda built a steady life together, Robin often sought to navigate his emotions in different ways, sometimes leading to the kind of turbulence that defined his personal life. Despite their contrasting emotional worlds, the bond between Barry and Robin remained unbroken. They were brothers, first and foremost, and that connection transcended the ups and downs of their personal lives. Yet, even with the support of family and the strength of love, Both brothers would face challenges that neither of them could have anticipated. As much as Barry relied on Linda to provide him with the stability he needed, and as much as Robin sought to find peace in his emotional turmoil, the pressures of fame and personal loss would test them in ways that love could not always shield them from. Yet, even love could not shield them from what came next. In 2003, the Bee Gees faced an unimaginable tragedy that would forever change the course of their lives. Maurice Gibb, the middle brother and the emotional and musical backbone of the band, passed away suddenly. Maurice had always been the glue that held the group together. He was the peacemaker, the calming influence when tensions between Barry and Robin flared. His ability to bring balance to the group was unmatched, and his passing left a void that neither of his brothers could fill. Maurice's death came as a shock. He had been experiencing health problems, but no one was prepared for how quickly he would slip away. It was a moment that Barry and Robin, despite their years of shared experience, could never have truly prepared for. They had spent their entire lives together, first as children dreaming of stardom, and then as adults navigating the world of fame. But now, with Maurice gone, everything felt different. Barry and Robin, who had already been struggling with their own creative differences and emotional distances, suddenly found themselves lost. Maurice was the mediator, the one who could smooth over arguments, make light of tense situations, and bring the brothers back together when their differences threatened to tear them apart. Without him, the brothers spiraled in separate directions. The grief and loss that followed Maurice's passing were felt deeply by both Barry and Robin, but they dealt with it in vastly different ways. Barry, always the strong, steady figure, was consumed by the weight of losing his brother. He had lost more than just a sibling, he had lost the balance that had kept their musical partnership intact. Robin, on the other hand, was more visibly affected by Maurice's death. He struggled emotionally, retreating inward and often feeling disconnected from the world around him. The bond that had once united the brothers was now fractured, and it was clear that without Maurice, the Bee Gees were no longer the same. Their music now carried a ghost in every harmony. The songs they sang, once full of joy and brotherly connection, now felt haunted by the absence of Maurice's presence. The brothers continued to perform and record, but something was missing. The spark that had made their music so special, so full of life, had dimmed. It wasn't just the sound that had changed, it was the way the brothers related to each other. There was an emotional heaviness in every note they sang, a weight that came from the realization that they could never again recreate the magic they had once shared. Maurice had been the one to bridge the gaps between Barry's vision and Robin's emotion, and without him, the music lacked its soul. As Barry and Robin tried to continue their careers, they found themselves constantly comparing their new music to the past, wondering if it could ever measure up. The brotherly harmony that had made the Bee Gees sound so unique was gone, and the music, while still powerful, never quite had the same energy. It was as if they were chasing the ghost of their former selves. Maurice's absence hung over them, a silent presence in every studio session, every performance. The loss of Maurice was not just a personal tragedy, it was a professional one as well. The Bee Gees had always been known for their unity, their ability to blend their voices and personalities into something greater than the sum of its parts. But now, without Maurice, the brothers were left trying to figure out how to move forward, both as musicians and as family. The dynamics that had defined their success were shattered, and it was unclear if they could ever truly find their way back. For Barry and Robin, the grief was overwhelming. Each had their own way of mourning, but neither of them had the ability to heal completely. The music, which had always been their shared language, now felt like a reminder of what they had lost. The bond that had once been so strong now seemed fragile and broken, and with every performance, every song, they carried the weight of that loss with them. Without Maurice, their bond would be tested in ways neither was prepared for. In the years that followed Maurice's death, Barry and Robin tried to reconcile, not only as brothers but as artists. Their relationship, though strong in its roots, had always been complicated. The emotional walls between them, built from years of rivalry, misunderstandings, and creative tensions, made it difficult to rebuild what they once had. But the loss of Maurice had shaken them both to their core. It had forced them to confront their past and the things they had never said to each other. For Barry, the time after Maurice's passing was filled with regret. There were things he wished he had said to Robin, things he wished he had done differently. He often found himself looking back on the years of silence between them, remembering the fights and the moments when they let their egos get in the way of their bond. The music, once a shared expression of their unity, had become a painful reminder of what they had lost. Barry's pride kept him from fully reaching out to Robin at first. He didn't want to appear vulnerable, especially after everything that had happened. But deep down, he longed to reconnect, to heal the wounds that had festered for so long. Robin, too, was caught between his emotions. He had always been the more emotionally open of the two, but even he had built walls over the years. He had kept his feelings hidden, not just from Barry but from the world. The pressure of living up to the Bee Gees' legacy, combined with the personal toll of losing his brothers and struggling with his health, had made him retreat into himself. His relationship with Barry, once full of shared dreams and aspirations, had turned into one of distance and unresolved tension. The cracks in their relationship had deepened as they both tried to navigate life after Maurice, and Robin struggled to reconcile his identity with the expectations placed on him as a member of the Bee Gees. But as Robin's health began to decline, there was a renewed effort from both brothers to mend their relationship. They started to work together again, trying to find common ground in their music. It wasn't easy. The emotional walls were still there, and the years of silence couldn't be erased overnight. But the shared history, the bond of brotherhood that had always existed between them, slowly began to resurface. They started writing together again, reminiscing about the old days and working through their differences. There was a sense of urgency, knowing that time was running out. Robin's health was deteriorating rapidly, and they both knew they didn't have much time left to fix what was broken. In the final months of Robin's life, as his condition worsened, Barry made an effort to spend more time with him. He would visit Robin in the hospital, sit by his bedside, and talk to him about their music, their childhood, and everything they had been through together. The visits were emotional, but they were also healing. They had never fully expressed how they felt about each other, and now, in these final moments, they were finally able to let go of the past and say the things they had kept hidden for so long. It wasn't easy for either of them, but it was necessary. For Barry, it was a chance to say the words he had been holding back for years, and for Robin, it was a chance to hear the acknowledgement he had longed for. The most poignant moment came in Robin's final days, when he was too weak to speak much. Barry sat with him, quietly watching his brother, the man who had been by his side through everything, slowly fade away. It was in these quiet moments, with nothing left to say but everything to feel, that the most significant words were spoken. Robin, with the faintest of smiles, looked at Barry and whispered, "We did it, didn't we, Baz?" It was a simple statement, but it held so much meaning. It was a recognition of their journey together, the triumphs, the struggles, and the music they had created. It was a way of saying, without actually saying the words, that they had made it through it all together. The grief, the conflict, the success it had, all led them to this moment. And in that moment, everything was forgiven. Everything was understood. Those words, simple yet profound, were Robin's final gift to Barry. They were a reminder of the bond they had shared and the legacy they had built together. It was the closure that both brothers needed, even if they hadn't fully realized it until that moment. For Barry, it was a bittersweet goodbye, knowing that Robin was slipping away, but also knowing that they had, in a way, made peace with their past. But even after death, some conversations never end. After Robin's passing, Barry Gibb found himself standing alone in the spotlight that had once been shared by three brothers. The world still saw him as the voice of the Bee Gees, but the reality of performing their music without Robin or Maurice beside him was a weight Barry wasn't sure how to carry. Every song, every note, every line of the lyrics they had written together felt heavier. Barry had always been the leader, the one to guide the group through the highs and lows of fame. But now, as he performed the songs that had once united the three of them, he felt the absence of his brothers in every chord. The energy of the Bee Gees' music had always come from their harmonious blend of process, sound built on the shared voices of three brothers. It wasn't just about the music, it was about the bond between them, the way they understood each other without words. When Barry stood alone on stage, singing "Stayin' Alive" or "How Deep Is Your Love," the crowd cheered, but Barry felt the silence in between. He could almost hear Robin's voice in the harmonies, could almost feel Maurice's presence beside him, filling the gaps. But it wasn't enough. He was alone, carrying the weight of not just their music, but their shared history. Their voices, once blended in perfect harmony, now lived on in recordings and memories. Performing their songs solo wasn't just about tribute, it was survival. Barry had to keep the music alive, not just for the fans, but for himself. The songs were his connection to his brothers, the only way he could still feel their presence. Singing these songs was a way of keeping the past alive, of honoring what they had built together. But it was also a way for Barry to keep going, to continue living with the loss of his brothers. The music was no longer just a career or a legacy. It was his way of coping, of processing the grief that never truly left him. There were nights when Barry stood on stage, his voice soaring through the familiar lyrics, and for a brief moment, it felt as if Robin and Maurice were right there with him. He could feel the harmonies in the air, like a whisper from the past. But those moments were fleeting. The truth was, performing these songs alone was painful. He could hear their voices in his mind, but they were never fully present. The shared connection they once had, the way they could complete each other's sentences, both musically and emotionally, was gone. What remained was the memory of their bond and the music that had come from that connection. But Barry could no longer rely on that bond in the same way. And yet, Barry pushed on. The crowd, of course, still adored the Bee Gees' music, still remembered the trio of brothers who had changed the world with their harmonies. But for Barry, it was no longer just about performing for the fans. It was about survival. Every time he stepped onto the stage, he was not just performing for the audience, he was performing with his brothers. In his mind, every note was a tribute, but it was also a way to keep them alive. to keep their presence felt in a world that had moved on without them. The loss of Robin and Maurice left Barry in a position he never thought he'd be in, carrying the legacy of the Bee Gees alone. But as the years passed, he realized that he could never truly recreate the magic they had shared. The music would live on, but it would never be the same, and neither would he. Yet, through it all, he continued to sing. Because for Barry, keeping the music alive wasn't just a tribute, it was the only way to keep going. The crowd cheered as Barry took his bow, but inside, he carried a quiet burden. The songs were still theirs, still his brothers' voices echoing through the world. But Barry was the last one standing, the last one singing their songs. And now, Barry is finally ready to speak the truth that remained unspoken for decades. For many years, Barry Gibb carried a weight that no one else could understand, the weight of an unspoken truth about his relationship with his brother Robin. The years of rivalry, the creative differences, and the emotional walls that had formed between them had created a complicated bond. But now, after all the years of silence and regret, Barry was ready to speak the truth about what Robin truly meant to him. Robin, with his haunting voice and poetic soul, had always been the emotional heart of the Bee Gees. While Barry had been the driving force behind their music, it was Robin's voice that brought their songs to life. Robin had a way of singing that went beyond just notes and melodies. He made you feel the music. His artistry was irreplaceable, and as Barry reflects on their shared journey, he realizes just how deeply Robin influenced not just their music, but his own life. For years, Barry had struggled with guilt. He had held on to the belief that he had not done enough to mend the rift between them, that their differences had somehow overshadowed the love they shared. But as time passed, and he looked back on their relationship, he began to understand that their bond, however complex, had always been rooted in love. The rivalry, the tension, the unspoken words, it was all part of their journey. They were brothers first, and their music was a reflection of that. Barry began to forgive himself for the moments they had lost, the words they hadn't said, and the misunderstandings that had kept them apart. Looking back, Barry came to accept their story in its entirety. The good, the bad, the music, and the struggles it had all led them to where they were. And in the end, the most important thing was that they had done it together. Their music had become the soundtrack of so many lives, and it would continue to live on, even after they were gone. Robin's artistic soul, the very essence of who he was, would never fade away. It was woven into every song they had ever created, and Barry knew that no matter what happened, that soul would remain forever alive in the music. For Barry, the forgiveness was not just for Robin, but for himself. He had spent so many years carrying the weight of unspoken words and missed opportunities. But as he stood on stage, singing their songs, he realized that they had done the best they could. They had created something beautiful, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The love they shared, the bond they had, was something that would transcend any conflict or rivalry. It was something that would last long after they were gone. Because some harmonies never die, they just live on in the ones who remember.